Alrighty, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Can, and I'm here with Stu Dalton, and we are going to be talking about roses today. Feel free to ask any questions that you may have via chat, and towards the end of the talk, I'll go ahead and ask those questions to Stu, and Stu will address your questions. So without further ado, welcome, Stu. The class is all yours.
Thank you, Can. This is my second version of a recorded class, and I have to say Can and Lyngso are great. If you're interested in growing roses organically, there's one from a couple of years ago that's on their site, and they record not only the class, but the questions. So I'm looking forward to some good questions. I'm Stu Dalton. I'm with the Peninsula Rose Society and I'm with the American Rose Society as a Master Rosarian. And with the hat on I have today, I'm with the UC Master Gardeners of San Mateo, San Francisco. And, people were asking recently, okay, I pruned my roses. What do I do next? And that's what we're going to address today. Just to point out, right now I'm waiting for the roses to open, and the fully open roses are a great place for bees. So one of the things I'm going to talk about later is cherish the bees. Oh, let me see here. I have a couple of blooms in my 250 roses. I grow in the south portion of Menlo Park, and it's the microclimate that's pretty well along the peninsula. I'm right next to the old Sunset Magazine location. And these are all pictures from my garden. And there are lots of varieties and colors and shapes of roses. Some are big, like the ones over in the corner here. That's a Sally Holmes. And some are very floriferous, like this one, which is a Floribunda. But there are all sorts of roses, all sorts of varieties. If you have questions at the end on specific ones, I might be able to answer. I grow about 130 varieties and about 250 roses. Today, I'm going to try and do what you do when the new spring growth appears. Hopefully, you're getting some now, depending on when you pruned. But if you pruned in early January or mid-January, you're probably starting to get a couple of blooms right about now. And one of the first things you want to do is open it up, open the middle. And you can do this a couple of ways, literally pruning, or something I will talk about briefly, finger pruning, just what it sounds like. You can optimize the soil, get the fertilization going at about this time of year is perfect. And then compost and mulch, and I'll talk about that more. What do you do after each bloom cycle? I'll talk about later. When you need water, and hey, I may start up my sprinklers in about a week here, because it looks like this was some of our last rain. And then you start to get pests. Usually the first ones are aphids. We'll talk about a couple different pests. Early spring foliage pruning. Wait a minute, you just got through pruning. Well, what you can do to reduce fungal disease and insects with no spray whatsoever is to lightly prune to optimize that circulation. I'll talk about that. And then pruning exceptions, which you hopefully may not have pruned, are some of those huge roses you see in the area as you drive by, and they're 20 feet high. You can't prune those things. And many of them are once bloomers. There are differences in how you prune those. Mainly, just trim it up the best you can after they bloom, because they only bloom once. And if you prune off all the wood afterwards, you'll prune off a lot of the blooms for next year. How do you prune? Well, I added on this something up in the upper right corner, and you say, wait a minute, that's not a pruner. Well, it is if you have 250 roses and you have shrub roses or these big monster climbers that there's no way you can get to all of them, but you can keep them out of the path where people walk by. First thing, And we try to emphasize that at Master Gardeners, protect yourself. Prickles, which everybody knows as thorns, are on roses. They're on other things, but roses, prickles can carry disease. I know because I got stuck once 20 years ago, had to have it lanced by the doctor. So heavy pants, heavy clothes, heavy shirts, and since I almost got poked in the eye once when a branch whipped up and got me in the forehead, hat to prevent it from hitting you, and glasses or goggles. If you have glasses, that's great. If you don't, I use goggles, clear ones. And gauntlet gloves. You see an example here of gauntlet gloves, meaning they've got a long forearm covering. These are really good ones. The ones I like have flexible palms out of goat skin, which is also thorn penetrating resistant. And it's typically cowhide on the long sleeves. That way you can reach inside of a rose and or reach inside there to prune or whatever. The other thing is the same idea that you get with taking a knife in the kitchen. The old saying, it's safer to have a sharp knife than a dull knife. You think, well, what do you mean? If the knife slips off and gets you, it doesn't have to be real sharp to hurt you. If it's really sharp, it'll go right through things. It's almost the same thing with roses. You got you try and sharpen the bevel edge of the bypass pruner. This is a bypass pruner. One blade goes bypass the others. And this is a diamond hone, but you can also use sharpening sharpener that has silicon carbide or even a sharpening stone. I like the sharpener because I can put it in my pocket and cover it and then just take it out every time I use my shears. You want it to be so sharp that you can cut paper. And that's a good test if it's sharp enough. I've told this story before, but I used to illustrate when I was doing pruning demos by shaving hair off my arm. That isn't such a good idea, and I did draw blood once. That was the end of that. Not my, whoops, sorry. I need to get back here. Sorry, did I lose you or are you there?
I'm here. I can see you there.
Okay, can you see me, but not the thing?
No, I can see the presentation as well.
Oh, okay, well then, it's just that I'm gonna put my password in here because I can't see it right now.
Oh. We've got plenty of time, so no worries.
It's okay. Okay, now I'm back. Sorry. It's irritating when you can't see your own presentation. But I want to talk about this hedge trimmer or things that are shrub roses. And there are a lot of shrub roses, all of David Austin, etc. I heard a few years ago that David Austin prunes their roses in the field using something like this, the hedge trimmer. The powerful ones can go through a rose in 5 minutes. And you say, okay, but isn't that bad for the rose? Not really. The best is a sharp, clean cut. But you can also do a lot of trimming, even during the season, with something like a good, powerful hedge trimmer. I'll be happy to answer questions on that, but not going to dwell on it too much. Let there be light and air. If there's one thing you want to do, it's prevent disease. And modern roses, the better ones, and some of the older roses are pretty good about disease resistance. Some of the older hybrid teas and such may be a little weak. There was one that is a great exhibition rose, looks really nice, and it's called Touch of Class. Its nickname is Touch of Mildew. So there are some that are more disease prone. And if you're buying a rose, you want to look at disease resistant. The good news is a lot of the newer ones have good disease resistance. One thing you can tell that by is, are the leaves fairly glossy? Not all, but many of the disease-resistant roses have glossy-looking leaves. But if you never spray at all, what you can do to really help is to get air and light in the middle. And that's one of the critical things to do right now. This morning, I was working in a public garden that we take care of at the Peninsula Rose Society in Redwood City, near the Red Morton Center. And it's looking pretty good, and it's going to need a little thinning out at the top. And I sort of over illustrated it here. Some of the things that are growing in the top in red, and this doesn't really look like this after you're done, but it's exaggerated to show opening the middle. And by doing that, and by stripping off some of the very bottom leaves, you do some good things. Air and light, you can't hide if you're an insect. You can get seen. And then there are the mechanical methods of getting rid of them rather than using any sprays. Aphids, for instance, hate dead bodies. So if you take your gloved hand, squish them, and leave them there, it's amazing how they don't seem to come back to that area. And if you, I'll talk about rinsing them off later, but a good water spray, aphids are dumb. The first 90% will come off in the good water spray. The second 90% will come off and voila, 99% are gone. But if you let air and light in the middle, by cutting out canes growing to the center of the bush so that pests can't hide, and fungal disease tends to be reduced by air and light. Extra ground clearance down here, maybe 6 or 8 inches from the bottom. You don't want to break off new growth that's good growth, but you do want to strip off some of the leaves on existing, what they call canes, think of branches. Strip those off. And that reduces splashing water, which can contain spores from the ground. If it doesn't splash up, it doesn't infect the leaves near the ground. Often later in the season, you'll see rust, especially near the bottom. Rose rust is a specific kind of rust that looks rusty, like the orange red. And late in the season, it turns black. But that often is around the bottom, sometimes on the outside too. But air and light in general can help reduce all of that. And it's something you can do right now. There's a technique you can use right now. If you think of putting your hand with a glove in the middle here and sort of run your fingers down it, that's something that will knock off some of the new growth that might, at this point in the year, be 1 inch, 2 inches long, and it comes off real easily. So if you don't want to take it off, don't touch it. But if you just run your fingers down the inside, you've opened up the middle. And so that's an easy technique called finger pruning, just like it sounds. Winter pruning exception is you prune the once bloomers after they bloom. You may have seen these big white or big light yellow bushes growing up and over the everything. Other trees, large shrubs, they can be 15, 20 feet high. Many of those, the white and the yellow, are so-called Lady Banksia. Lady Banksia is the white, Lady Banksia lutea is the yellow. They are once bloomers. Another one that's very old is Celsiana. It's a damask, great fragrance, but it only blooms once. Those are 2 examples that if you prune them in the winter, you've pruned off a lot of the growing, blooming wood for next year. Wait till after they bloom. They bloom for a long time. Spring flowers are on 1 and 2 year old wood. But always, any rose, in the winter, if you find some in the spring, if you've got dead wood, remove it. Damaged or diseased growth, remove it. You can rejuvenate a rose by pruning out the oldest wood, and I can talk about that later in the question and answer, and we do have videos on that as well. But you can get rid of the oldest growth, wait for the new growth for the next year, cherish that, and basically keep doing a little of that every year. You've got a rejuvenated rose. The oldest rose in the world is documented as over 800 years old in Heidelsheim, Germany. The dog rose, it's called. But you prune these lightly or shape and train the rows. You don't have to prune a lot on these old once bloomers. Then in early spring, which is right now, you want to do things like I did this morning at our public garden that we're working with the Parks Department in Redwood City near the Red Morton facility in the Community Activities Building. We were adding organic matter, evaluating the soil, and addressing soil compaction partly by adding a thick layer of mulch, which incidentally, thank you very much for Lyngso. They donated some of the mulch and the Parks Department bought some mulch as well. And now is the time after the big rains, actually, and when you're starting to have new growth, to add fertilizer. So you evaluate the soil, add organic matter as necessary, address soil compaction, fertilizer, and mulch. And I'll talk a little more about this. Soil, very important. This is a standard soil slide from the people that are in Master Gardeners. They did it perfectly. Talks about how what most people have is not this. If you have a house that was built and then they scraped the soil, put on a layer of topsoil, and it's been walked on a lot and it's bare, you don't have this much air and water. You maybe have 30% air and water. What you want is pore space, a lot of room for air and water, because the roots need both. The typical thing we think of as dirt, soil, sand, silt, clay, is the most of it. But organic matter is this small wedge, but boy, is that important. The most important thing on creating soil structure. And if you look at the pieces that go together, sand, you can think of a grain of sand, how big it is. This is if it's blown up. Silt, the next largest particle, is much, much smaller. And I used to think I had clay soil because that's what everybody says. When I tested it, I found it was heavily silt. And it's relatively small. Clay, true clay, you can't even see the point. It's the size of the grain or the particle. And it retains water to beat the band, sometimes too much. And you can basically drown a rose if you have clay soil, and that's all it's in. It retains nutrients well, it retains water well, but if you don't have enough air and water room in the soil, you can drown the thing. You can drown it. So how to support it? Protect the soil from wind. Okay, I would add wind and gardeners with heavy blowers. Rain. Yes, rain can compact the soil. And sun, it'll bake. And people say, oh, I have to have the rose garden clean and blown. Please don't. Please add the mulch on top. I personally like arbor mulch because it has different interlocking sizes and it doesn't blow away in the wind. And I don't have my gardener blow it at all. Clean up. This is one thing different from the standard soil slide. The soil slide says, leave the leaves. Well, if you do that with roses and you've had any disease, like from the year before or from pruning, you've just kept it over for the next batch of roses. So clean up any diseased rose material and put it in what I call the city compost. Unless you have 140-degree compost uniformly and you're good about it, you have pathogens that go over from one season to the other. So put it in the city compost. So you feed the soil, not the plant. You can, if you think about woodlands, they get all the nutrients they need from the litter and compost that is occurring naturally. If you use mulch and compost, that'll take care of most things. Now I do add time release nutrients and organics. and I'll talk about that a little bit. Keep traffic off the soil to prevent compaction. Walk on the soil in my yard and underneath all the mulch, and it's sort of spongy. And that's because that mulch will break down and become soil and improve what's called the tilth, or the structure of it, and it'll turn into, it'll turn into compost with time. If you're trying to get rid of weeds, start a new area, get rid of turf, which there's a lot of reasons to get rid of turf, sheet mulch, which is a whole process you can look up on the Master Gardener's site or the UC site. This is too complicated. I'm a chemical engineer by training, worked in air pollution, water pollution, and alternate generation. But you don't have to be too interested in a pH. If you just look at the green and yellow areas right down here in the middle at 6.5, very slightly acidic. In this whole area, I've got a rose down here to keep you focused. This whole area, the soil can provide the nutrients really well if it's got the right pH. pH is the soil acidity or basicity, and it's very slightly acid. Now, the native soil plus amendments or compost added can refresh the existing soil. If it's been there for a long time, it's all compacted, you can do things like work compost in at the top, add a little bit of time release fertilizer and or organics, kelp meal, mushroom compost, bone meal, fish meal. There are all sorts of really good organics. I'm not going in that this time, but I can't answer questions on it. If it is too alkaline, compost cottonseed meal, and or if it really is alkaline, you can add sulfur, but normally compost and cottonseed meal will get you a little more acid. If it's greater than 7 pH, that means it's alkaline. If the soil is acid, less than 6, you can add dolomitic lime, which has magnesium in it, or as well as calcium, and then oyster shell. A paper soil test is better than what I have had for years, which is a probe. That gives you general ideas, but the paper soil test you can buy easily on Amazon or other places. And you want the soil test, not regular pH for testing like pools or anything. Because it's designed to be, you put a soil sample in there, shake it up, and then test the liquid. And that will give you a good idea. You want to test a number of areas around the garden because it can vary. If you're under alkaline, acidic producing plants, like I've got redwood trees, that area under there gets very alkaline. Acid. And if you're in an area that has alkaline soils, very dry, etc., you can have an alkaline soil. So you want to test it in different areas of the garden. Fertilizer, compost, and some of the organics you can use. Now, they can supply all the nutrition that's needed. I buy lots of my favorite compost. This is not a plug. It really is what I use. The Diestel compost from the turkeys, the Diestel turkeys, that is the one that is sold by Lyngso. So I go in and I ask for Diestel compost and buy a bunch. It's worth the money, in my personal opinion. And I have no stock in Lyngso. Most organics release nutrients slowly. Microorganisms break the organics down and make the nutrients available. They won't burn typically, unless you decide to use something like raw chicken manure, which you should not. Compost everything first. Raw horse manure also has things like seeds, weed seeds. So you may not want to use that unless it's fully composted. Alfalfa, which you can buy in big bags from a feed store, or in really nice packages from places like Lyngso and others that sell organics, it has wonderful nutrition. It has a natural hormone called tricontinol, which stimulates growth. And the pellets are very inexpensive. So if you have a couple roses, I'd get a bag. I wouldn't get this. I use about 250 pounds a year. So about a pound per plant per year. I feed the soil with compost, and that's what you want to do. Around the drip line of the rows, that's where the outside of the leaves are growing. I put a donut ring of compost, about a 5-gallon, around a big rose that's established. And then I put mulch on top of that. And that provides a lot of the nutrition that it needs all year. I pull back the mulch that I might have there, put the compost on, cover it up. You do need to be careful, as I mentioned, with raw manures. All the fowl manures, turkey or chicken litter, can be harsh, especially near the roots. That's because there's a lot of ammonia that's in raw chicken manure. That's rough on the roots. And that's why I say here. By the way, horse manure can get hot too. You don't want to cook the roots. They can be quite warm. Mulch. Big fan of mulch. This is a picture of what arbor mulch looks like. Now, I admit, there are prettier mulches. The ones that are nice, small, beautiful mulches are great, but they can blow away. And the multiple sizes, if you walk in the area of the roses, the multiple sizes help spread out weight so it doesn't compact as much. And underneath this, there's a lot of air. And as it starts to degrade and turn into soil. So it improves the soil health, it improves the soil structure, it reduces water use, it reduces weeds, and if there are weeds, they tend to be long and stringy coming through the mulch, and they're easier to pull. Large, as I said, larger organic wood mulch doesn't blow away. I use my arbor mulch, there are others. I even had a big tree fall down in my yard from the neighbors, and it was ground up, and I got 7 free yards of chipped oak, and it made a great mulch. It can be left year to year. Some people think you need to take it off. Not really. The microbes eventually break it down. What they call the destroyers, the type of beetles and things, the worms get into it, the fungi break it down with time. There are good fungi too. So what you do want to apply it as leaving about 6 inches away from the base. And the reason for that, by the way, is to keep from getting right on what's called the bud union. You see a sort of a knobby thing down at the bottom. And you want to keep that clear so that it doesn't get fungal disease or anything else. So just keep a little area around that area clear. That also allows you to see anything that's coming up from the bud union, which is down at the bottom, the knobby thing where most of the cane should be coming from, if it's a grafted rose. Or if it's not coming from that, it's probably going to turn into a red, once blooming sucker of what's called Dr. Huey, which was used for a lot of rootstock in California for many, many decades. Still is. And it can take over, and I don't have the slide in this one, but I've got a slide down at the Municipal Rose Garden in San Jose, outside and inside of a cyclone fence. The inside had a few dark red roses. The outside was all this suckers, big, huge suckers. They hadn't been pruned back because they were outside the yard. So after each bloom cycle, so you're enjoying these in late April through May, you're enjoying your blooms. And afterwards, I'm using a term that the people that taught me about this didn't like, deadhead. You know that on many flowers, if you cut off the old blooms, you'll get more blooms. Same with roses. And so you deadhead or remove spent blooms, which is the proper term I was taught, and you remove suckers and you shape the plant after each bloom cycle. Remember to open it up because things will have grown in the middle and get air and light in there. And then you water or mulch if it needs it again. You amend and fertilize. I often just add liquid fertilizers like if you don't have cats or dogs, you can add fish fertilizer. If you do, they'll go and scratch it all up. But if you use, there are some things you can put on that don't have that kind of smell. Alfalfa, some dogs like to eat it. It won't hurt them, but it's basically like it's alfalfa. It's what they feed to critters like sheep and cow and cattle and horses and whatnot. Remove suckers. Why are they called suckers? The way I like to explain it is they suck the life out of the main plant and go into the sucker. So you remove those the best you can. Now, sometimes some sucker more than others, but you remove them near the base. I'll show a couple of things. And you manage pests and diseases. Roses do have some, though many of the newer ones are more pest resistant. The deadhead, here's one that I picked as an example. And you said, wait a minute, that looks like a real rose. Well, yeah, it was. It's finishing up. You can tell by these bottom petals. And I used it specifically to illustrate after it blooms, before it goes to what's called hip, the little round, usually orange or red things at the end. You can have a long stem, and what I'll cut it at, you can probably count. I see 3 leaves here. I see 3 leaves here. I see 3 leaves here. So I cut it way down above a 5-leaf set pointing outward. So I deadheaded it that way. You remove the spent blooms, you prune to shape, and you also then, after the first bloom, prune the once bloomers. You water, you mulch as much as you need to again, but you do amend it at this point with, I usually use just alfalfa and maybe the fish, as I was mentioning. Check the plants. Now you start walking around the garden, enjoying your roses, cutting some for inside, and you look. Do you see any critters? Do you see what sometimes are called livestock on there? Early in the year, you might see aphids. They are some of the first to come out. I'll talk about how to deal with those. Sorry. Okay. Here's the after the bloom cycle where you cut. 3 leaves, 3 leaves above the 5-leaf set. And I want it to grow this way, out. Why do I say the direction? It doesn't know any better. It will grow from the bud eye that's right below this cut. If you pull it off with your gloved hand, you pull it downwards, underneath you'll see what looks like a nose and a smile underneath. The smile is the scar from taking off this leaf. Cut above that, and it'll grow in that direction. That way it opens the plant. You'll get a repeat bloom in typically 6 to 8 weeks. And since they are staggered as to when they come off and they finish, you can get almost continuous bloom on many of the roses. You remove the dead or damaged growth, that's always true. Say a windstorm broke a branch, get rid of it. Or a cane, I should say. And you prune about a 1/4 inch above the damaged growth with the facing out to encourage open, airy, and bright center. I did have this slide in there. Suckers. This is at San Jose Municipal. You can probably see a dark pink in here. Not many of them. Here's one, here's one, here's one. You can see all these red over on this side and even some inside. These are all suckers. They're very vigorous. That's why they grafted on originally because they have nice, vigorous rootstock. This is a tree or standard rose. It's hard to see it, but there's a sucker coming out from the base here, and there's another one coming out from the roots here. Anything that comes out, except where you want it up and top, is a sucker. There are 4 pieces in a standard tree rose, standard/tree rose. There's the roots, then there's this long trunk, let's call it a trunk, and then there are 2 budded pieces on the top. Not 1, but 2. And so I call those the antlers, because if you sort of hold your hands together and point them out, that's how you want to prune it in the winter. And in the summer, you just keep that middle part open. But removing them as completely as you can is key. Now, it's almost impossible to always get all of it. I work it back and forth down near the root, and sometimes the whole thing will break off, and that's the best. Or cut it as close as you can to the root. And unfortunately, they often do come back, but you don't want it to suck all the life out. So that's why you need to cut them back. Then to water properly, what you want to do is encourage deep roots. There was a good research project done up at UC Davis and down at Irvine and several other places by the UC Agricultural Department looking at roses and what you could do to water the least and which varieties did the best. And admittedly, some of the hybrid teas took a little more water. I bought one recently that was the winner, and it was called Lemon Fizz, a weird name, but it's a relatively new rose. And they went up in Davis with 2 waterings all year. 2 in Davis. It gets hot. They had really deep mulch. They watered infrequently and very deeply. And after the first year or 2, you can encourage deep roots by watering deeply and infrequently. When you put a new rose in, you got to keep it moist until it develops roots. But if you water all the time, once a day or a couple times a week, or 3 or 4 times a week, where will the roots go? Near the top. And if you water with things like pop-ups, where are they watering? They're spraying down near the base, but all over. They're not concentrating the water near the plant. So bubblers or drip, if you can stand the drip irrigation, are better for the roses. And you water slowly and deeply, and about 5 gallons per week per large plant's usually sufficient. You've got minis or small plants. Whoops, sorry. Sorry. 5 gallons per week per large plant, usually sufficient. Organic matter can improve the soil space and structure, providing more air and water space down low. And so that also helps keep the plant more resilient and more drought tolerant. Lawn uses more water than the roses. Some roses use less water than other roses. Your watering technique can reduce the water, the fertilizer, etc. Managing fungal disease. The 3 biggies are here. Again, I have to say, this is a UC Master Gardener one because I never get quite that bad at mildew. But if you live out on the coast, if you live in San Francisco area, etc., you might find that there's more mildew. Warm days, cool nights cause mildew. Everybody thinks it's water on the top. No. UC, and I have references at the back of this, says overhead watering actually reduces mildew. And most people don't know that. Now, overhead watering can be bad for black spot, can be bad for rust, but it reduces mildew. For black spot and such, overhead watering is rough if you do it too late in the day. Always water early in the day so it's dry before it gets to be nightfall, and that'll reduce black spot. Can't help it when it rains, but you might have a little now. It's been raining. But rust is often splashback or splash up from the bottom. And rust is a little more prevalent, and it's a rose rust. It's very specific to roses. You can see my thumb there with the nail cleaner than when I'm working in the dirt. And this was down at the San Jose Rose Garden. They don't spray at all, and it's easy to find there, and frankly, in many rose gardens. What you do for black spot, strip off the damaged leaves at this point in the year, if you see any, so that it doesn't spread. It's likely that it will not show up on new growth in the mid summer or new growth in a drought. We may be ready to start our drought section of the year. Powdery mildew is in summer, caused by warm days, cool nights, which sounds like the Mediterranean microclimate we have here, especially out on the coast. Rose rust is can't say it. Rose rust is all year. You remove and dispose of the badly damaged foliage in city compost. If you spray, this is generalized for everything you do in the garden. Try not to. But if you do, you want to use the lowest toxicity sprays if needed and only as needed. Some of them, and the one that the UC says can eradicate mildew, is a relative of baking soda. They used to have a commercial product called, let's see, bicarb old-fashioned fungicide. It's been used for a long time. It's potassium bicarbonate. It's also sold in its pure form as a nutritional supplement for people if you have low potassium. So it's basically non-toxic unless you take too much of it, just like too much table salt will be toxic. But neem oil is another example, but you use it and neem extract is about 1/4 the toxicity of table salt. Again, you don't drink salt water, you don't want to eat a lot of salt, it's not good for you. Well, neither is neem. But I use it as a mouthwash in its form that's sold by the dentists as neem mouthwash. And I know it's non-toxic, but it is a mild fungicide, miticide, and insecticide. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in the next one. If you don't wish to spray for fungal disease, again, air and light, and increase the ground to foliage height. Overhead watering reduces mildew, as I said. Black spot often goes away. And if you spray, you can use non-toxic or less toxic sprays. Neem, potassium carbonate, horticultural oil, but you got to avoid the bees. Neem and oil both will smother bees. They aren't toxic per se, but they are if they can't breathe. They can't breathe if they have oil on them. So if you spray early in the morning before the bees are out, and there are other things you can spray non-toxically that are recommended for things like apples and peaches and such that add copper, which as a chemist, I say that's not, and oil. Those aren't organic, but they're certified for organic use by the US Department of Agriculture. All these are certified for use on your organic produce that's out there, though not everybody uses any sprays. Here's something that's not, it won't kill your rose, and viruses in camellias are praised and favored because they give this nice pattern on the rose leaf, pardon me, on the camellia leaf. Roses, not so much. If you show your roses and you have mosaic and it shows up on the leaves, you'll get points taken off. What it looks like, I describe it as, you almost need this in bigger, but you see this yellow down here and the yellow over here and the yellow up here. These are all early in the year. This happens to be a Gemini rose, and they will not kill it, but some of it sometimes looks like lightning bolts, very irregular patterns of yellow. It cannot be cured. It comes from the grafting process. I even got some from a very reputable place from David Austin. They will honor the return policy, and you can get them taken care of. But if you have them on their own root and it was virus free, you can't have this. If you have clean material, and UC Davis now offers clean rootstock for grafting to the commercial houses and offers clean types of different roses commercially, so they can use clean material. How do they get it? A special low temperature autoclave that doesn't kill the plant material but kills the virus. So they actually have a way to treat it, but you can't do that. You can't put an autoclave on rose in the garden. So it can't be cured. It is not spread by shears. That's a old tale that is not true. This is from UC Davis R&D. Luckily, it does not show up in new growth in the summer. Usually it's only in the spring. Very occasionally I'll see a little bit in the summertime, but you can prune it off if you want to. It doesn't look good. It weakens the plant a tiny bit, but not a lot. I've still got a couple plants in my yard that I haven't bothered to take out. Insects and mites, common pests this time of year, especially if you fertilize with high nitrogen fertilizer, which many people recommend. That produces a lot of growth. What are aphids like? This is new red growth on the end. And if you can look real closely, those aren't ants, those are aphids, all up and down. And this is one that I hope you don't have. I've had it. These are pictures I took of the rose curculio weevil. In my yard, I call that the evil weevil, because they poke holes in the buds, they infect the buds, they fall off, they fall into the ground, and next year, guess what? You've got new weevils. There are ways you can get rid of it. I don't go into that in this, but I can talk about that. Basically, a bucket of soapy water. When you try and grab them and squish them, they tend to dive off into the bucket of soapy water and drown. Spittlebugs, unsightly, but they look like they've got foam on the, these are all early in the year. If you have oak trees, and I have a number of oak trees, this is the tussock moth. These you don't want to squish with bare fingers because they have irritating spines. When little kids get into them on an oak tree or whatever, and they get their hands on it, they come back with a little rash on their hands. So they're irritating, so you don't squish these. This is one eating one of my roses. Here's a secret weapon. Now, it says in a lot of the literature, wash aphids off with a strong burst of water. This is something you can buy in any store, and the end is a nozzle. I have no stock in the Fog-It company, which is local, but they make a great nozzle you can put on the end of one of these angled things. That allows you to stand up straight, reach underneath the plant and blow upwards, and then reverse it and blow downwards, and you'll knock off at least 90% of the aphids. Do it twice, maybe a day or two apart, you've gotten rid of 99% of the aphids. They don't tend to kill the plant. And if you don't have enough ladybugs and soldier beetles in your yard to take care of them, the beneficials, this is an easy way to knock them off. Aphids are dumb, they don't come back. That's my theory. Mites often appear a little later in the summer when it gets hot, often near the bottom. If you've got some foliage near the bottom that you didn't take off, or if you've got minis that are near the bottom, this same strong water spray works really well for knocking off mites. Can't really see those things. It looks like dust. Take a sheet of white paper, tap some of the leaves, and look at the dust. If the dust crawls, it's mites. You want to use integrated pest management. Otherwise, you can look it up under UCIPM, integrated pest management. And there are all sorts of things that can be done to encourage the good ones and get rid of the bad ones. Certain companion plants, alyssum is a good example. Marigolds is another. lavender. Those are all nice companion plants, shallow roots, and things like alyssum. You might see little black specks on there. Those are often parasitic wasps that go after the bad bugs. And so since it's impossible to get rid of alyssum, I encourage it in the area around the roses. And similarly, I plant some shallow rooted plants like rosemary and such in the area as well. Classic to plant with roses. If you spray, use only spot sprays. In other words, I've got a horrible set of, say it's the Rose curculio beetles and I haven't got them all. I use something that's spinosad, which I haven't talked much about. It's derived from a soil bacteria. It's certified for organic use, but it's one that goes after beetles better and weevils. But always follow the label, read the label. So how am I doing? In summary, and think of your questions now and get them into the chat. I see a couple are in there now. Or we can do them later in person. But as new foliage emerges in early spring and after each bloom cycle, open the middle for air and light right now. Make sure your pH is good. Buy some of those strips, test the soil in a few areas around the roses so you know what you're working with. Try and deal with the soil structure and compaction. Mulch eventually is the best thing in adding compost. Fertilize and compost and mulch. That's right now. Pardon me. I'm going to take a drink of water here. After each bloom cycle, what do? Deadhead, remove suckers, and shape. Water deeply, infrequently. It'll save water, nutrients, and the rose will like it better, and they'll be more resistant to droughts. Manage pests. Wash off, use integrated pest manage and organics when at all possible. I seldom, I can't think of the last time I sprayed with anything that wasn't certified for organic use. And I exhibit roses. So, speaking of roses, if you aren't already aware, Master Gardeners, I'm putting in a plug for the Master Gardeners Spring Garden Market. It's the main way that Master Gardeners makes enough money to support the programs we do, like this one. And it's, if you'll look down at the bottom here, guess who's sponsoring it? Lyngso is a sponsor for the Spring Garden Market. It is April 13th. And by then, hopefully, I will have some nice fragrant roses as well as some blooming roses to put there in a display. And I'll have some boards that talk about what you do for pruning, what you do for propagation. And the main focus will be what you do like we're talking about here in the middle of the year. We'll have some handouts, informational information. It's done in conjunction with the Peninsula Rose Society, and I believe the San Mateo Rose Society will also have one of our in-training Master Gardeners there, and that's someone who can also help. I know she's not on this because she's in training, in fact, today, and so she couldn't be on this session. But the sale, we have a sale of probably 150 roses, maybe more. I've got about 100 started from propagation right now. And then that starts at 12 noon. It's going to be in the patio area in back of the Community Activities Building, 1400 Roosevelt Ave. There's information and flyers up about this. But after you've gone to the Spring Garden Market, there's always at 9 o'clock a rush. And if I didn't get all my tomatoes ahead of time, I will go and join the rush right as it's opening and pay. But they have some great tomato plants, some great eggplant, herbs, all sorts of things. So go for the Spring Garden Market. There are also informational booths, talks. it's an educational fair as well. It says educational fair. It really is. And I'll have two different tables there that you can come visit and talk roses if you're interested. So stop and smell the roses. Hopefully I'll get it. Last year we didn't have too many fragrant ones. This year, hope to have more, like we normally would. So that's stop and smell the roses. I want to acknowledge Lyngso, both as partners with the Peninsula Rose Society. They're one of our sponsors on our show, sponsors of the Master Gardeners, and just great organization. Now I understand owned by the employees, because Terry Lyngso gave over the ownership, as I understand. The presentation was prepared by me. I'm with the Peninsula Rose Society, American Rose Society as a Master Rosarian and a UCCE Master Gardener. And most of the photos were mine, just the one I mentioned from the others. If you want to subscribe to the monthly newsletter, take an image on the one on the left, and it'll set you up to be subscribed to the monthly newsletter. Articles are in there, events are in there, etc. If you want to consider a donation, you can do it on the right to support events like this one. We have a helpline. We have several locations where, say you have a issue with anything, roses, peach leaf curl, whatever it is, and you bring it in a closed sample in a sealed container, because we don't want to spread the rose issues. But they have it out at the Elvis Ranch, which has a demonstration center on Mondays. On Tuesdays, it's at the San Francisco, excuse me, I got the hiccups. The San Francisco Botanical Garden. They don't want samples. And then on Thursdays, excuse me, I have to get some water. On Thursdays, 1 to 4 p.m. at Veterans Memorial Senior Center. That's at 1455 Madison Ave, very close to the place where our Rose Show is going to be at the Community Activities Building, which is just across the Rose Morton open area, across the soccer fields. You can follow us on social media. You can contact us at the website. And if you just put San Mateo, San Francisco Master Gardeners search, you can find this emailing. And some of the references, UC has some great ones. I use a lot of them in my work with roses. But here's on cultural practices and weed control. I was weeding this morning. Not much fun. There's something the Master Gardeners say, a year of weeds, 7 years of seeds. So you really want to get them before they go to seed. And right now they're easy to pull because the water has made the soil soft. Diseases and abiotic disorders. That's not critters, and it's it can be fungus and things, but it might also include things like the rose mosaic virus. Insect and mites. Insects are not spiders or mites, but that's why they separate them. And beneficials. There are lots of beneficials in your garden. Green lacewings, the soldier beetles, which are brown and long, and some people think, are those bad? Both ladybugs, which everybody knows are good, and the things that look ugly but are even more effective, and that's the larva of the ladybugs. It talks about all of these in the pest notes, which I highly recommend. American Rose Society has the Consulting Rosarian Handbook, which I use. You have to be trained to be one of those guys. If you do it too long, they make you a Master Rosarian, which I am. And then, went back. And then finally, the Rose Society has a guide to rose diseases and their management, which I believe is available still to the public I have an old copy of it, but anyway, that's it. We have a few, I see 5 questions on the chat. We'll read those. And while you're thinking of any more questions, these are 4 roses from my garden. 2 are considered large flowered climbers, bottom 2. This is a what's a classic hybrid tea that happened to win a King of the Show. By the way, King is the second prize, Queen is the first prize. And this is Graham Thomas, which is a shrub rose. And these are the David Austin roses. This is one of his yellows. Okay, with that, I'll take questions.
Alrighty, thank you, Stu. So we do have a couple of them. So if folks have more questions, go ahead and send them over through chat and we'll read them here. So the first question is, can you over prune roses?
It's pretty hard. Let me give you an example from history. In World War II, that 800-year-old rose was knocked off down to the roots. It's now 40 feet high again. It's on a church in Germany. You can often, if it's on its own roots, things can often grow back from even the most severe pruning. Say a tree fell on it and it just broke the whole thing off. You might want to leave what's left for a little while. But I often prune, you probably are going to cringe, some of my hybrid teas, 1/3 to 3/4, 1/4 of the height. So there's not much left, and maybe 5 canes or branches left. Pretty hard, but I do point it to the outside. So usually I leave enough structure so that it's properly pointed to the outside and it's a handful pointing out. Floribundas are pruned a little less. In back of me in this photo, this is a shrub white. This is a shrub white. Down here is a floribunda. Floribunda, lots of flowers. And this you prune a little lighter with a little more branching structure.
All righty, thank you. So the next question is, this person, they have roses in pots and not in the ground. And one of the pots has an ant infestation.
Yep.
And is that harmful for the roses? And what's the best way to get rid of them?
Not really harmful for the roses, but it's pesty, literally. If it's a small pot and a small rose, if you can immerse it in water, the ants say, bail out. And they take all their eggs and they literally come swarming out. And you can use something like peppermint oil and clove oil. There are a lot of different non-toxic sprays if you want to kill them. And frankly, I don't want them to relocate into the other things in the area. So that's what I do. But the other thing I would highly recommend is almost every rose in a pot, including mine, I've got a lot in pots, needs to be repotted eventually. And you can root prune it with a sharp spade along the edge of the pot, pull it out, add a little more soil and compost around it, put it back in the same pot, or you can go to a bigger pot. And if you try and do that with the ants in there, you're going to be crawling with ants. Again, been there, done that. So I like to immerse it in water if I can, and then wait till they bail and sap them. That's what with a non-toxic spray.
Alrighty. Okay, so this person wants to try drift roses this year. And what is your advice?
They're pretty easy. There are a lot of them. If you think about freeway interchanges with the red ones or the white ones, those are sometimes called ground cover roses or drift roses. There are a couple different versions. Some of them are great. Most of them are great. All of them are pretty darn hardy. They're very resistant to disease. They don't tend to get very high. If you want something high, you're going to need either a climber. This is actually a shrub. It can be grown as a climber. It's Sally Holmes. Uh, by the way, it's the most photographed rose in the Bololi garden. It's an example of a tall rose. The drifts don't get that hot. I've got a few in my yard. A red one with a bright yellow stamen center is really common. And it's really disease resistant. So you don't have to do much. And if you think about it, those don't get much care in the freeway overpasses. But, you know, standard things, if you want to take care of them, you don't have to just use a hedge trimmer if you want to prune it, or shears, hedge shears, and just give it a little fertilizer in the spring. That should take care of it.
Okay, it looks like that was the last question regarding roses, but folks want to know when and where the spring garden market in San Mateo is. And I've shared the link with everybody that it's on Saturday, April 13th. And then your Peninsula Rose Society's annual rose show, that is in May 5th, right? I think that's also, no, that's
May 5th.
Sunday.
It's Cinco de Mayo, for always the first Sunday in May, and it happens to be Cinco de Mayo this year. So we're calling it Fiesta of Roses. We last year had 28 arrangements, over 400 entries, a whole bunch of trophies. This year we're going to do something different and have the fragrance judged by popular choice. So you get to be one of the judges if you come. And we'll have probably 150 for sale or so, maybe more, and some raffles. It's at the Community Activities Building, 1400 Roosevelt Ave. The public part is from 1 to 4. If you want to exhibit, go on peninsulaRoseSociety.org site, and we'll have the schedule, which is the Bible on how you exhibit, what you exhibit, in what classes. And if you have any questions, you can contact me, because I happen to be the chair for that. And it's at very secret email, StuDalton@gmail.com. No one would guess it's me.
Thank you for that. I do have a couple more questions here that just came in. This one says, recently I've started noticing a lot of Japanese roses. What kinds of roses are they, and is it easy to maintain?
Well, there are different roses from around the world. They all started in China, and there were no Southern Hemisphere species roses. They were all in the Northern Hemisphere. Hold on. They were, China had 10 million years ago had fossilized evidence of roses. And what were called tea roses were just one of the examples that came out of China. And then hybrid teas became a hybrid later on. Japanese roses are typically hybrids of various types. The English roses are hybrids of various types. The English often put in old roses and fragrant roses and disease resistant for things like the David Austin roses. The Japanese roses, I've got a couple myself now, and there's some good ones. They're not always easy to find. So if you can find them, or you can get cuttings of them, try them out. I am right now. But all the roses that are in commerce and popular are in a book. You can't read that from here, but this is the American Rose Society Handbook for Selecting Roses. There are about 5,000 in this. I've got another book that says where roses are available anywhere in the world commercially, and has 16,000 with cross indexes of where they're available. And so if you want to look up a specific one, first you look in this book, and if you can't find it there, you might find it in the absolute insane listing, tiny little print with tiny little references to where all these roses are available. No pictures. This doesn't have pictures either. I believe one from Asia, I'm not sure if it's Japanese, I'm not even sure if it's in this latest one. I don't think it is. But some of them aren't in this one because it's not in commerce in the US. No, it's not in this one. It might be in that other. So it all depends. These are all rated nationally as to how vigorous and how good they are. So I don't put anything in that's less than a 7 rating in this book. I haven't seen ratings for all the Japanese.
And what is that, the name of the book again, Stu?
This is, you get it when you become a member of the American Rose Society, or you can buy it for $10. A little book, 5,000 roses in it. It's the handbook for selecting roses. We may have a couple of the old ones available. It's done each year. We may have a couple of the old ones available for people that join the Rose Society and don't join the American Rose Society.
Alrighty, thank you for that. I do have a couple more questions here. So what are the best fertilizers for roses and what's the frequency of fertilization?
The most important fertilizers are slow release, done right now. When the roses are starting to grow rapidly, if you put many of the chemical fertilizers out, say in January, some people do. Okay, what was happening in January? Lots of rain. What happens when you put chemical fertilizers out? If they're not time release, they can leach. And so the fertilizers go through before the roses are growing. So right now, when the roses are growing actively, is the perfect time to fertilize. If you pull any mulch or anything away, fertilize around what's called the drip line, which is the area of the rose that is where the drips would come off of a full bushed out rose. Work it into the soil, and you can use their time release ones. There are also all the organics that naturally take time to release and don't burn. All the kelp meal, fish meal, bone meal, chicken litter, mushroom compost, and all the those type of things, and alfalfa, put those in, cover them over with soil, then cover it with the mulch around the drip line, leave the bare middle. That's the best way to get quite a bit of bloom during the year. Now that breaks down slowly. You can also amend it, sometimes called side dressing, after each bloom. So I talked about fertilization after each bloom. I often use alfalfa, some of the liquid fertilizers like fish fertilizer, which is stinky, compost tea. There are many things you can use for organics. And they like to be alternated with different things, but I always use lots of alfalfa.
Can you add mulch to potted roses?
Yes, I do. And it reduces the water use. Having a terracotta pot, they will transpire more water, so you have to water them more frequently. And they will sort of adhere to the sides. The good news about a V-shaped pot is if you do have to transplant it, you can knock it out. Sometimes even more violently than you want to. I have a YouTube video under Peninsula Rose Society YouTube channel that shows repotting the rose. And it sort of just dumped out on the ground when I tried to repot it. I trimmed the roots a little bit, put it back in with some new soil, and that was the repotting, but it was pretty dramatic, and I laughed at it. So you can laugh at it too.
All right, so this person wants to know, can I plan to exhibit when I have nothing blooming yet? And do I have to know the name and history of the roses in order to exhibit? And to clarify the question, what if they don't know what will be blooming before the rose show?
Well, you can start figuring because, again, 6 to 8 weeks, you should be getting some vigorous growth, 6 to 8 weeks ahead. I've got buds on some of my early blooming and once blooming roses right now that are pretty big. I've actually got some old roses that are blooming, that are do a little repeat blooming. But some, like the ones in back of my picture here, Sally Holmes, and they're growing. They're not putting out buds yet. You can sort of guess that 6 weeks after you start to see the littlest bud is about the time it'll be in exhibition. A couple of weeks before, you can do things like groom in the for exhibition in the garden. I even talk about that in something else on the YouTube channel, Peninsula Rose Society YouTube, which I talk about grooming and exhibiting. And for classic hybrid teas, you want a lot of long stem. So you look for long stems. You look for it to be straight. You don't want a lot of bugs. Well, you don't want any bugs, no livestock. And you want the leaves to be clean. So you want to try and keep them clean by the culture techniques we were talking about. There's perfect form for exhibition, and there's other forms for things like this Floribunda or these. These don't have what's called exhibition form with a tight spiral center. But that's a topic I could go into at length, and we have things like that written up in our Rose Society newsletter. Anybody that wants to join, I also happen to be the membership for the Peninsula Rose Society. This is not a solicitation, but we do have some good articles for people that want to arrange, exhibit, figure out what diseases they have, encourage bees in your garden. We have lots of different talks and information.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. That was the last of the questions. I think you answered all of them. Thank you so much, Stu, again. This is a very informative class as always, and I hope lots of people attend the spring garden market as well as the Peninsula Rose sale. So those two links are shared in the chat. Once again, thank you everyone for attending. Any closing remarks for folks?
Yeah, just clean them up in the middle, keep them healthy, and fertilize them, and you should get good results.
Awesome. Thank you so much again, Stu.
Yeah, I'll be happy to answer any emailed questions as well.
Yeah, perfect. And the email, I think, is also shared with the attendees when they registered. So, and you shared it in this talk as well, so which will be available.
Yeah, the talk itself, a PDF will be available of all the slides that I had, because everybody was obviously writing notes furiously, but if you didn't, you can go back and get some of the information on the slides.
Yeah, absolutely. All righty. Thank you, everyone. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.